Hello, everyone, and welcome to this EGX Rezzed panel, where myself and Max are going to take you on a nice level design fireside chat, where we look into the multifaceted nature of level design. I hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions, we'll drop Twitter links and everything at the end, and you can reach out to us and interact with us live later on. So we'll start off with a little bit of an intro about us both, like about our careers, kind of how we got into the industry, because like me and Max know each other, we kind of go way back, but to some of you watching out there, probably who are these two random guys on the internet? But we'll see how the rest of it goes. After that, we're going to take you into a little bit of a deep dive into level design pipelines, talk about how we approach personal work, some of the mistakes we've made in our careers, because we all make them, right? It's like we can't get away with that. And some of the levels like we're proud of that we've made in our careers as well. So do you want to just give us a brief intro to yourself, Max, and like what you've done and kind of how you got to where you are, or how you got to be on this podcast?
Yeah, sure thing, mate. So thank you for having me as well, mate. Really appreciate it. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Max Pears. I'm a professional level designer. I've been in the industry now for a bit over 8 years. Worked on a range of titles from mobile to augmented reality, and now currently AAA, where I've found my current home. I've worked previously on that on Ubisoft, the Division franchise, and now I work at CD Projekt Red as a senior level designer with my most recent title, Cyberpunk 2077. I'm also the host of the podcast known Level Design Lobby. And as Jonathan said, we have, talked, been friends, exchanging ideas for an absolute, plethora of time. And it's been, great to be talking to you with you again to this, and to hopefully all those who are listening, we hope to provide some more inside details to that of level design. Do you want to tell the people about yourself, mate?
Sure, man. So yeah, like Max said, we've known each other for a few years. Still struggle to do an event together in person. That still hasn't happened, but we'll get there. But yeah, so I've been in the industry, I think, a little under 8 years, maybe, because I think I joined a little bit after Max got into the industry.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of my time working in the indie space. So I started off working at Coats Inc., where I got to work on action platformers, VR games, which was kind of a lot of fun. Kind of moved on from there to work with Pocket Money Games, which once again staying in kind of that indie space, but we did get to spend some time working on Super Hot for Quest, so there's kind of a strong VR theme there, which was quite exciting when it first blew up, right? My career started, VR started taking off again, so it was like an interesting way to try and learn how to apply your design knowledge there. Then I made like a sidestep into the AAA industry for a while, where I worked at Hangar 13. I got to work on the Mafia Definitive Edition. Kind of finished that project with them, and then kind of felt a little bit kind of lost and wasn't sure about what I wanted to do next. So I took like a sidestep into kind of setting up my own company and becoming freelance. And now I'm currently working with Us2 as their senior game designer. So a little bit varied, but quite interesting and always learning, right?
That's it, man. I think it's a great one because we have different experiences in this industry, right? You've seen different perspectives more on the indie than I have. And we've both, as I said, been in around about similar time. And you mentioned there VR and how this new tech has obviously presented itself throughout our careers. And we've seen, platforms and that change around it. So I think, we've got a lot of different perspectives in a good way to, again, help anyone who's going to be listening to this talk.
100%. And like I said, it always bounces off, right? It's like every time we talk about it, we're always talking about the same things in terms of the theoretical, how you can apply them. But then how do we apply that in our professional work? That's what always differs, right?
Yeah. That's it, mate. And I think that brings us to a very good point right now. Is differing with how that you kind of break into the industry. As we said, our paths have been different. And also kind of how we broke into the industry has been a bit different.
Yeah, sure. So like I think it might be a little bit similar to yourself. So I went down the education route for the most part, right? It was like I think I left secondary school and I stumbled across a college course which had game development in it. And it was like at the time, because games courses weren't super huge, it was like a BTech in media production for games, but there was game engine work and stuff in there. And like for me, I was like, yeah, this sounds cool. And I was really into games as a kid, and I was like, didn't have any idea how you got into that industry. But I thought this course will at least show me that. Course wasn't great. The thing I remember the most about it was I think the first time I opened a game engine, like we opened Unity in one of our modules, and I found the terrain tool and made an island, and then dropped the first person like camera in, I could run around it. I was like, okay, this is quite cool. Obviously, there's lots of complex systems you learn underneath that,
Yeah.
but that was when I finally got like that spark of being, okay, this is how you start to put things together, and that's when I first started seeing like
Mm.
hierarchies, loads of different scripts, and seeing all the moving parts kind of behind the scenes. And then
Yeah.
yeah, I moved on to university from that, where I did a degree in computer game design and production. So the one thing I can't ever fully switch off in my head is the little producer inside of me. So like whenever I'm trying to estimate a task, or someone's like, "Oh, can you do this thing?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." But let's just put a little buffer time in there, just like make sure it still gets done and gets on time. But yeah, I think that's the thing when you're doing the education stuff, and we've spoke about it in the past.
Yeah.
You can't just do your course, right? You can't just do your project work, because if you did that, we're all going to graduate and go and apply for the same jobs with the
Yeah.
exact same work. And you need to do little things to kind of like stand out, which could be networking events. And a big one, I think, for a lot of people is game jams. So,
Mm.
yeah. But
No, mate, it's a great one too. And did you always know you wanted to get into games there, or was it like you said, it was something cool? You'd obviously grown up with games, and how that
so
got.
I think it's like, because obviously when you leave secondary school, right, you still don't really know what you
Yeah.
want to do. And like I'd done media production and things like that. I'd getting into like a bit of graphic design at the time.
Mm.
Like I shot and put together like a music video, so I was
Oh,
directing people and stuff like that. And then the media production course like kind of led on from that, and I was like, this is kind of cool. But I always like live production, if that makes sense, and like kind of that's what games end up becoming, right? You're just
yeah.
everyone's working together to put together this project or product, and like that's what like took me on that like tailspin. And it was as I
Mm.
learned more through my college course about the different roles in the industry, that's when I started to realize, yes, this can turn into an actual job.
All right, man. That was really cool about how it all came to about, and it's
So
interesting
how
to talk about like different production as well, because I think obviously there are a lot of similarities between films and TV
yeah,
in that of games as well, right? So
yeah,
it's very
yeah, but
very cool to hear, man. I think that's
how
the
about
first
yourself,
time.
man?
Yeah, I think that's the first time we're sharing these stories with one
Yeah,
another.
well, this is because we never go this far back, so this is the
Yeah,
interesting part.
that's it. So no, man, I think similar to you in a sense that, but for me, I think I always knew I wanted to do games. I
Mhm.
always was blown away by. I remember like writing stories, getting my hands on in Unity, and the Unreal like modding kit you got with gears and stuff. And like the first game I made was when I was 14, 15. It wasn't anything huge or successful or anything. It was more of a flash game where you
It's where you
had.
made your billions. It's how you made your
That's it.
billions, right?
I don't want to give away, but this is pure green gold. In case you didn't realize, people, it's a real thing. Google it, but don't Google it. But the thing more was it was it was just like basically like a spaceship. You could press a button, moving it left to right, and some asteroids fell down in just how long you lasted.
Yeah.
Just do that all through Flash, and from there again, like it was that question you were asked at the end of secondary school. Well, what do you want to do? You said, I was like, oh man, I don't know. So games was always the big option for me, and from kind of that point, I looked into different university courses, and I found where I went, which was Teesside University, and that's where I kind of started to realize, oh, okay, there are routes in. There's definitely different elements to make it better, like better by me being better. And so I went over and did that, and from there, this is kind of where it all came together, because you have an option in that university to do what we call a sandwich year, where you can go work for a studio for a year. And the company called Fog Media, which is free online games at the time, they were doing some mobile games, and they came to the presentation at our uni. I was like, oh wow, okay. And I went over and approached them, showed them some of the work, and they said, yeah, we'll take you on. It was fantastic to do that. Worked on about 7 different mobile games throughout that year, and it was a
It's a lot.
really, yeah, man. We made it into the top 100, top 50 as well, app charts for a couple of the
Mhm.
games as well. So that was a huge thing for us. Never, never Angry Birds or anything like that, but like still the time to make it onto that top, those charts was always great to see. And from there, like you mentioned earlier, it's about networking and building your portfolio. And this is where I started to meet a few people. One of the key people was a man named Andrew Willens, who is
I
now,
know him.
yeah, game
We
director.
all know him, right?
Exactly, great lad. Game director over at Sumo Digital Newcastle. And I met him again when I was doing a competition called Dare to be Digital, 2013 now, and now I feel really old as I realize
Yeah.
what time it is. But
It's scary, man. It's
it's
like,
we don't want to scare anyone here, but no, it's there, and we worked in this really great augmented reality project. I met Andrew again there, and thanks to him and meeting a few others, such as Manny Diaz, I was able to speak with them over at Ubisoft Reflections, and from there they were able to give me a chance to work in the industry. So all kind of came about through networking, personal work, and just constantly looking for career and opportunities, mate. That's how it went around.
but I think, yeah, I think it's interesting. We both, like, obviously, we both touch on events and networking, but it's like
Mm,
we both got different opportunities that were doing that, right? Like, so you met
yeah,
Andy at a very different point in time. You went on and like interacted with them, and that networking was how I got my indie opportunities right at the same
mm,
time. And it was like, but I think it's putting an emphasis on you never know who you're going to meet, what conversation you're going to have. But it
mm.
does come down to just always being aware of how you're selling yourself, like as
Yes.
well, right? Because you don't want to be a loudmouth know-it-all in front of a room of like seasoned developers, right? Like
Yep.
it's not going to end well. But like, yeah, it's important to, I guess, it's easy to see it now, but like read the room and kind of think about, but also appreciate developers are still just regular people, right?
Yeah.
They're not like they don't need to be put up on like a pedestal or anything. They're just normal people who love games. They're happy,
Yeah.
usually, from my experience at least, and hopefully yours. They're happy to chat to you about
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
No, that's it. And I think you raised a great point about how do you carry yourself, because again, you don't want to be that person who's like, give me a job, give me a job. Like, I want to just give a an awkward interaction that happened to me when I was at a networking event, so people don't do this. And it was you could tell it was this game dev kind of gathering. We were at this pub, and this lad was sat at a table by himself, and there's a few chairs around. Me and my friends were sat at a table behind him. I said, "Hey, mate, do you mind if I take a chair as someone using this?" He said, "Oh yeah, you can take it if you give me a job." And it was the most awkward silence I've ever been in. And it's there not to embarrass or shame anyone. It's to do again about how you compose yourself, right?
Yeah,
Because you don't want to come across as give me a job either. It just have, as you mentioned, we're regular people. Most people don't like to be put up on a pedestal. I do, but flattery will get you everywhere. But no, like you want to be able to have like a sincere chat, like you said, talk about
hmm,
games. What is it that you're trying to do to improve in your career? These elements can just help you again come across in a more natural conversation, because the best conversations are just natural ones, not about
yeah,
oh you're amazing or something like this, like or like give me a job. It's again just talk, just discuss things that you enjoy about either games they've worked on, what games they're playing, and it can help from there. I guess, do you have any tips when it comes to networking as well, mate?
it's kind of similar. Like I prefer just like you said, getting into that normal conversation instead of
Yeah,
it being like you go up to them and you've got that thing in the back of your mind. I need to ask for a job. I need to
yeah,
ask. It's like yes, I know that's your end goal. Obviously, going back to when you're a student, it's like you're craving it, right? You really want that job. You're coming up to
yeah,
graduation or you have graduated. But I always got because I get learnings out of those conversations as well. Right? Like
mm,
talking to them, and it's like you're chatting about the games or you just end up chatting
yeah,
about design in general. You learn so much from that 15-minute conversation, and not knocking courses, but you will probably learn more in that conversation than what you do from certain assignments you have to do for
mm,
university, right? And it's one of the ways I still, and maybe you're the same, I still learn a lot today from when I go to events and I meet other developers and other
yeah,
designers, and you're just having that casual conversation after they've given a talk or you've seen them at the coffee stand or
yeah,
whatever, and you just end up chatting about your craft, and it's when organic learning starts to happen, I
yeah,
always find. And that's put say COVID's destroyed that a little bit, and like it
yeah.
has been missed. But I do think there's a lot of learning opportunities just like you can stumble across just by being in those situations.
For sure, mate. I completely agree. So, again, for anyone who's is networking, just be yourself. Talk about
Hmm.
like more normal kind of manner, normal tone. Talk about games as well, things you like, and if you're gonna say things you didn't like, make sure there's actual like reason to why. Don't just
Yeah,
there's constructive criticism and then there's just insulting people. So do not do the insulting side. And again, just make sure that you are doing your personal work so you can show in case someone asks as well, right? So always make sure you've got something at hand to show. The more you show, the better it's going to be. So yeah.
Like I've spoke to you about it before, and
Mm,
obviously I mentioned it a little bit offline, but it's like it all comes down to your portfolio, right? And
mm,
I think when you're a designer, your portfolio can be many things. So like you need to figure out, are you a level designer, game designer, puzzle designer? What you're showing is going to be
mm.
very different, and there can be lots of different ways to do it. But it's like, how do you usually approach it if you're putting together your? It could be the first portfolio you did, or it's like how do you approach maintaining your current portfolio?
Yeah, mate, it's a great question. I think this is a strange thing more so now that social media is playing more of a
Yeah,
role in general. So the reason I bring up social media is talking about like branding, which is the weirdest word to use, especially when it's coming down to portfolio. But that is something you need to consider when you're creating your portfolio's aesthetic, the way that you present any logos. So I think the first thing is making something that is kind of visually engaging. And this is the strangest part because for us as designers, creating, like we said, either that be gameplay, level design, combat design, whatever, that's kind of not the focus when you're actually
mm-hmm.
making the portfolio piece itself. However, the portfolio is very different in terms of design. So make sure that you've got something that like draws someone in. So I always say this, and I know people get sick and tired of me saying it, but do not have a white background with black text as your portfolio, because if you haven't put in effort to make it look good, who's going to put in effort to read it? So think about that.
Yeah,
The second thing is you want to get straight to the work. When someone's reviewing your portfolio for a job, they've normally got hundreds of other applications. So they don't have time, sadly, to go through everyone's website. So your homepage should never be the About Me section. That should be another section where they will go to if they're interested in knowing more about you. So the first thing, well, after you get your aesthetic, is make sure that it is the work that is the way that is presented and easiest to get to. I think from there, then it's making sure, how do you say, you've got something that can best show off your designs, right? We said just earlier there that when we're making portfolios, it's not necessarily about making something pretty. And the reason that is design needs to be functional. Design needs to be something that you can hopefully play. So if you can send a link up to being able to play, do that. But again, time is kind of dependent on the reviewer. So if you can't, someone's not going to be able to play it, then think about having a video. If you can't get a video, put some GIFs in. And if you can't get some GIFs, put some pictures in. Imagine it just in the hierarchy of being able to view your work. It would be playable, video, GIFs, picture, text, right? So those are the best ways to, in your hierarchy, to actually present your work. So make sure that your presentation is consistent. And it's about how you show those screenshots, GIFs, or videos, right? Because the GIFs, we spoke a bit about this off air, is when someone's reviewing your work, they're not necessarily looking for the quote unquote best level. They're looking to figure out how do you design as a designer? What's your process, your thoughts? So a GIF is a great way to show, okay, this is block out my first attempt. This is me now iterating and iterating and iterating on it, so they can see the changes and you can talk about why. And that's super important. While a video is going to be more interesting to show, okay, here's the roots. I'm going to talk about why this route leads here, what made me think about it. And pictures, you want to kind of, again, show, okay, this is where the player's going. These are their options. Don't just take a beauty shot. That's a lot of thing, a common thing, sorry, that I see in people's work is, oh, okay, well, this is just the level. Okay, but what can I do with that? Like, show me, okay, if this is a combat area where some enemies might be placed, where the player comes in, and we can start to put connect the dots there. So those are kind of some of my kind of feedbacks and thoughts when I'm creating that of mine. What about yourself, mate?
like it's kind of there is like a lot of crossover, and like the big one for
Mm,
me, I think that you pointed out at the beginning was always make it be your work first. When I go
yeah,
to your portfolio, like you say, I don't want to see the about me page, and that like I give this advice a lot when I do portfolio reviews as well because I still see it happening.
yeah,
I kind of already know the about me section because I've probably getting your portfolio link from your CV or from your cover
mm,
letter. So, and usually the about me section is not different to that. It's usually telling me the same information, and I think that's quite important as well. And then like also like talking a little bit more about the content and stuff like you did there. Obviously as designers we go through a thought process, right?
Yeah.
So like we don't just want to see that beauty shot or the video of a completed level. We like to see the development things. And for me, ideally, as much as I know it's not the most exciting thing and I know it's not what everyone does because it's not part of their process, right, I do like to see some kind of 2D work, but I understand
Mm,
not everyone works with 2D maps, right?
yeah.
It works for my process, but I now know that not everyone needs to do that. But then if you're doing it from memory, I would have expected you to do research. So maybe
Mm,
I can see a mood board or a reference board or something in place of that.
yeah.
And then, yeah, I'd rather see your block out and, like you said, the iteration stages rather than just see the finished thing and maybe it's some beauty shot angles, even if it is the block out space. I'd rather see it when it is just blocks and then you've added a little bit of detailing like afterwards. Just because if you're trying to get a job, you're then the designer that's reviewing your portfolio can kind of try and envision your thought process.
Mm,
And then if you get the interview, that's where all your questions are going to come from. They're going to ask you about either that or a test they've given to you.
yeah.
And like one thing I bring up about GIFs specifically because it's more of a modern take on like how you do these things. It used to be screenshots of videos,
Yeah.
but I think like you said, GIFs are very good for the before and after. But I also think GIFs are better for mechanics than
Oh,
like because you can
interesting.
just like you can think if I'm just doing like I don't know a grenade explosion or a respawn system or something like that. It's a few particles in an event happening in a very short space of time. I don't necessarily need a full blown video for that. So you can have little gifs,
Yeah.
and that could be a gif of a health pickup, or a gif of an interaction, or a switch, and they can be a little bit quicker and snappier to put on as well. And it just adds a little bit of like dynamic stuff to your page as well, among some text, hopefully explaining it.
Yeah.
I will also say, yeah, don't be afraid to put text on it. I know we don't want
Yep.
walls of the
Yep.
stuff, but I've seen a lot of people where they will just try and use the image but you sometimes you don't get you're not really telling me
Yeah.
what you this image is meant to show me. It's like, is it the final piece, is it this?
Mm,
So yeah, I don't mind having text, and I think like a lot of people a while ago got a little bit afraid of explaining themselves, so they just tried to remove all text, and it's like that's not what we're telling you to do.
no.
Yes, we want it short and concise, but we still want to hear your rationale behind your level.
Yeah, I think I always explain it if you do have like a walkthrough video. Again, someone's not going to watch the entire video, but
100%.
imagine you the what information you have in the video you need to present in text as well, so people can again
Yeah.
just read through. Some people don't want to watch videos, some people just rather read through, so you're kind of catering the information twice but to different people. So yeah, I completely agree with that. And I want to say like another thing, and I'd like to hear your take on this, mate, is when people tend to do portfolios, they feel they have to create the full game, right? Like, I'm making
Yeah.
the new game. What you should be doing, just because it's a little bit easier for you to communicate, is instead base your level, your mechanic, whatever again your particular part of design is, on that of a pre-existing world, because it's easier to sell that for people to understand and can get up to speed with the project, rather than creating your whole game you have to explain before they even get to your designs. So that's a big thing for that. And when I say that, I mean make a new level. I don't mean recreate a level you saw in a game that you're a fan of, because the hard work already is done there, right? The designer has already gone through so many iterations and finished the level. So what I mean is, again, pick a favorite game of yours. You might be able to find controllers out there for Unreal and Unity. There's some incredibly smart people who have released some free, some a reasonable price out there for different controllers that you can plug into Unity or Unreal, or maybe different engines, and that you can again just go create a new level in that world. So that's a big thing that I recommend for anyone, especially starting out in wanting to build up their portfolio experience, mate.
Yeah, I mean, like I all kind of agree with that as well because I see it a lot in people's portfolios, so people are starting to do it. And you're right, having that grounding of you're not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
You're if I was on this project, I would have built this thing, and this is then you're going through why and your reasoning behind
Mm,
it. But it does help you get started a lot quicker. It does mean you'll probably be able to produce multiple portfolio pieces rather than trying to figure everything out just to produce one. And it's something I've like I used to try and do it from scratch, right? And it doesn't
Yeah.
make sense because you're trying to figure too much out. And I think a lot of that stemmed from my experience being more in Unity, where we never used to have
Yeah.
all these pre-built things, whereas Unreal, you always had kind of from the get-go the third-person character
Yeah.
controller, the first-person character controller, and there are a lot of good controllers on there. There was a bit more of a level playing field now because you have like in Unity, you have like game kits and playgrounds and stuff, so they
Yeah.
give you a lot of like mechanical stuff, so you could go and build a 3D platforming level, and you have enemies, pickups, and stuff already built for you. And that's what a designer's doing, right? They're usually working with pre-existing systems to set up interesting environments for a player to go through. So I would, play with that kind of stuff instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch.
Yeah, I mean, and that isn't to obviously deter anyone who wants to make their own game. Please go ahead. We'd love to see it.
Yeah.
But again, this is for a portfolio to help you stand out if you're aiming to be in a specific role of design, shall we say? So yeah. And now I guess we've talked a bit more about personal work, obviously portfolios. I think we can circle on to actually the pipeline about making levels, mate, and
Yeah.
how we kind of go through it. So just as a heads up, there are different kind of pipelines. Me and Jonathan have spoken about this before in personal work versus professional work. But there's been a great discussion point for how we both work. So I just wondered if you want to talk about kind of your experience, whether that be professional or personal, mate.
So I think I'll start with like the personal side to it if I was doing it, and like obviously my background has always been heavily Unity based, so it's like I kind of spoke to you a little bit about it before. It would always usually start with some kind of like level gym, and then I would build a bunch of prefabs, and some of them might just be like cover objects, or they're going to be assets I reuse over and over again through a level. So stuff like doors, like it could be like cameras or anything, and then once I've got them and I've set them up, then that's fine. Or these could be assets I'm getting from a store as well, right? And then I repurpose them for what I need for my game. But when we talked about this, me doing a level gym and doing it all in prefabs works for me. But
Yeah.
if I was then to go into a team, it might not scale as quickly because like I wouldn't necessarily always building the best version of this prefab. I would be building it for my design purpose, not necessarily for an artist's purpose, an audio designer's purpose, and an animator's purpose at the same time. So it doesn't always scale straight away. And obviously you can, but the good thing about prefabs is you can update them if it was ever to go into a team. And the point is, it means when I update that, it already updates in my level. I don't have to go and replace every object. So that's why I've always been a fan of like stuff like kits and prefabs and stuff.
Yeah.
And you find a lot of AAA studios, they might not necessarily have prefabs, but they have an equivalent. Or at least I found that in like kind of my experience and stuff as well. But the thing I noticed the biggest, especially when you're working in a studio, like within a AAA environment, is that pipeline of getting your level into the editor. Like, because sometimes you are using Unity or Unreal, but there are times where you're using like an in-house editor, which will have a custom solution.
Yeah.
Which usually means you have to go through either Maya or Max, which is kind of industry standard. But we're not saying you have to be a 3D modeler to like use this. You're still just doing blocks. You just got to use that software to do it. Then you'll import that into whatever game engine your studio uses. I've also gone through like process of using SketchUp, and SketchUp was actually quite fun for doing blockouts because obviously it's architectural software, right? You can nail your metrics. It's great because you can actually measure them out and draw rulers and stuff. But that for me was quite far removed from the editor process because it's like I want to get in and run around it straight away, but there's so many steps of like, okay, it has to run through a 3D software package that then kind of exports it as an FBX or whatever. Then that goes into the editor. Then if I want to change it, I have to go back to SketchUp and then do it again. So like for me, it's all like all my pipeline stuff has always been about how can I get it into it the quickest. So like I'm always like an ambassador for trying to get some kind of editor or mesh editor in an engine. And obviously we've got packages in Unity, which makes this easier, like Pro Builder. There's like something called like 3D Modeler and stuff like that as well. And I know there's the BSP put stuff in like Unreal, and I know they have their issues, but at least you can quickly iterate on a blockout without any of that back and forth between packages. So like for me, it's all about that streamlined process, at least early on, because as soon as it becomes an art mesh, design can't edit it as freely or easily, right? So like that's where it becomes a problem. And sometimes you've got to make big pivots, but hopefully you've caught all them before the arted version of something goes into the editor.
Yeah, mate, it's it's interesting hearing that because I think you do design obviously different, and that's the thing we want to point out with this is everyone does design slightly different, and that's okay. There isn't a universal answer. Now, pipelines will be similar, but again, your design method may vary from what we'll talk about. And I think that's such a great point. And he said is like getting straight into the editor. I think that's always the most important thing. As we said, even with the portfolio stuff, you need to be able to play. You need to be able to understand how it actually feels to move through the space, or if you're using a mechanic, something like that, how it actually feels while playing. And for mine, it's similar. I think one of the things we want to touch on as well is you mentioned this during the portfolio section, mate, was that you spend some time getting references and doing your 2D maps, or if you want to do the skeletal block out, the very simple version, SketchUp, whatever have you, in there as well, because. And we'll talk about mistakes later, mate, for this. But, myself included, being guilty and seeing it in young designers as well, is everyone wants to jump straight into the editor, right? It's the funnest part, shall we say, the most creatively fulfilling. And I think that, it's really important with any pipeline, whether it be personal, especially professional, that you get a strong foundation before you even think about hopping into the editor, making sure that you have the references that is going to help you build your level, right? Because there's nothing scarier than that whole, blank canvas, right? So you need to make sure that you have information, the correct information, to be able to use that to help, guide you in the right place. So that's why, we recommend gathering references. Now, I normally say like a minimum amount is around about 50 images and videos. And then from there, you can kind of cipher down. It can obviously be more. Like I said, that's the minimum. But you can then start to siphon out the ones that you like, the ones that you think are really important to you, and then can help to, again, push you in the right direction through architecturally. Think about the purpose of the space before the player got there. I always ask the question, where's the bathroom? Because if the place is being used by people, there's probably going to be a bathroom. So think about those things. And then from there, same as you, mate, I start to go from either a 2D map and start to kind of translate that into a space. Now, I don't tend to use the more kind of like either Maya or those kind of modeling kits. I actually have a whole set, or tend to use kind of, LD kit pieces. Imagine that like Lego
it's like
sets.
packs, yeah. So you've already got the pre-made blocks, which will be like 1 by 2, 2 by 2, and you've just got loads of them,
And that's it. And I think that is it's just easier for me personally to use that. I say it's kind of like Lego. It has your metrics already built into it, so it's really hard unless you're really trying to push it to go off metrics. And I think the other thing from this is we were on a hammer home with this pipeline as well. Each base will be different, but the process of iterating will always be the same here.
Yeah.
There's some people that think, sadly, that you get it right first try. You never do. And you never will.
I wish.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'll be paid a lot more for it. And we'd get a lot more levels done. But it's important to play through, play testing, iterating, getting feedback and addressing it. That's what helps push your levels to being the finished products, to being the best it can be. So make sure that you do play it, you test it, and then you consider calling it done,
Yeah. I think like the comment about iteration, it's like that has so many stages to it itself, right? Because you'll iterate on it yourself, right? Your first pass you'll go through, and it's like anything. You said you do the 2D map stuff first as well. You'll do that code and editor. Something doesn't translate correctly, right? Because that's just what happens. So you do your own like internal iteration before you even get to that playtesting stage. And like even playtesting, at least from my experiences, that has multiple stages. So I will play test it with my team, so my other designers that are around me. But that's only giving me very surface level information because they are other designers, right? They know what to overlook. They know what's going to change. You get more valuable information depending on the size of your team you're working with when you go to either people from other departments, or if you're with a big enough studio, you get actual playtesting information, right? Which is when it is just from like your average consumer playing the game. And then you just constantly get that feedback, and it's up to you as the designer to kind of sort through it as well. Like,
Yeah.
because some of it you'll get raw. Like other times you'll get it fed back to you from a director or a producer saying, "Oh, we need to do this." But sometimes you will get that raw playtest video, and then you're sitting there like, "Oh, they didn't understand this," but that's one person. Like, is it worth
Yeah.
fixing for that? Like, what if fixing it for them breaks it for everyone else? So it's a very fine balancing act, I think, when you start going through the iteration cycle.
That's it. And like you said, part of the skill as you get as you become a better designer is figuring out which of the feedback is worth
Yeah.
addressing, and especially due to time. You mentioned obviously you're a producer in your own mind there, mate. But again, that's a huge thing because you do
Mm-hmm.
have a time limit professionally, and sometimes personally as well. We don't always get an insane amount of free time in life in general from all of us from all ages. So again, sometimes you might have to put your own deadlines in there. So yeah, man, we're human. We've made mistakes, and that's okay. So do you want to kick us off
Yeah.
with some of the mistakes
Um,
you've made, champ?
so like I think the first one, like, because it's quite topical to what we were talking
Mm.
about with the personal work and portfolio stuff, was it's just for me it's not keeping like lots of work in progress stuff from past jobs. And
Right.
obviously depending where you work kind of depends on how much that's available to you, what you can share once the title and stuff comes out. But
Yeah.
if you leave a job and then you lose that equipment or whatever, you no longer have your blockouts or things like that unless you've backed them up somewhere. And like I realized, I think it was before I joined Hanger, that made making a portfolio really difficult because now
Yep.
suddenly you're going through Google or Let's Plays of the games and trying to get all this screenshot. But then you're like, yeah, this is cool, but it gets back to the problem of what I said is I don't want the like glamour shot, right? I don't want the finished level, but because I don't have my workstation anymore, or I don't have the
Mm.
archive of all the work I did when I was at that studio, I can't show my full process or like things like that. And it's like it's dawned on me later in my career, sure, and I do try to make more of an effort of doing it now. Of like whether it's compiling it into a talk or just taking a screenshot or like a diagram I've drew over an old blockout to explain something.
Yeah.
Now I realize the value of keeping that stuff, if that like kind of makes sense. And I know if I had it all, it would make demonstrating to a future potential employer exactly what I did on this project
Yeah.
instead of saying I built this mission.
Yeah.
It's not quite the same, right?
No, mate. It's a great point, and as we talked about portfolios, obviously, it's it's better to be able to show those with progress shots, and like you said,
Mm-hmm.
because so many people touch so many parts of the game, and trying to get that moment, and especially when the game releases, your level design doesn't look anything like how it started, especially visually, because you've got an incredible team of artists who've made it look so beautiful and so engaging that yeah, your sexy blockouts kind of get taken away from it. So that's a good one, mate. I think the biggest mistake I think I made, mate, here is not understanding metrics enough. I think
Mm-hmm.
that was my big one. And metrics is really important for anyone who is aspiring to get there, right? Because it's important for you to understand the distance, because you need to know the distance in terms of one, architectural. If you want a corridor to have combat, you need to know, well, how wide can it be to allow for actually good feeling combat. Or if it is a mechanic, you need to know how much space the player needs in order to execute it without the animations messing up or clipping cameras being an issue. So really understanding that, and that's what we talked about earlier, and we always kind of stress this in portfolio works as well, is make sure you have a grid on the materials you're using for blocking out, because those 1 meter squares are really crucial to getting down the details to make the space feel realistic and fun to play. So I think that was definitely a mistake I made, mate.
I think with the metrics one though, right? It's not super easy to just fall on that because it can
Mm.
change per studio. Because like you said,
Yeah.
that the metric you had, I know working at for CD Project, it's like
Mm.
that could be different at another studio for what works for their animation system or stuff like that. But it is a very important thing just to ingrain in your mind is metrics. And if there isn't defined metrics for these things or these actions, and are these actions a player's going to do again and again and again, that's something you need to learn. Define them or have that conversation with your team and make sure you define them like overall.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I spoke to you a little bit about it before. one of my bigger mistakes from a production side of it and actually
Mm.
developing the actual game is like joining a new studio, joining new projects, and then not digging enough into a feature to see if it was fully possible. Because, like, say, when
Mm.
we're doing our blockouts and we're doing that first pass of gameplay logic, you're like, oh yeah, it's functioning, that's okay, and like that's fine. But as you go throughout development, you'll do asset requests and stuff, and you're waiting for things to come online. But those things have implications on that logic you implemented early on, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
triggering it, and like my bigger example was the triggering of animations and not fully understanding an IK system. Because realistically, that's not my remit, right? That's not what I'm delving into all the time, but
Yeah.
it was involved in my mission. And it's like once it got to the end, like the new animations come online, you get them, and you suddenly realize, okay, the IKEA was never actually going to go to that, but
Yeah.
you were kind of like we're never 100% told no, it will never come online. Like,
Yeah.
because they're like, yeah, we've seen them do that in the game before. I'm like, okay. And you're the newbie, so you're like, okay, at the time, I believe this is fine because everything else is working fine. Your logic setup, all your own animations are kind of like implemented properly. But then you combine playing fixed animations while it tries to transition into IK, and you find out the actual system doesn't
Yeah.
support that. And I was like, okay, I should have dug deeper, or I should have just sat with the animators for like a month and said, just take me through the entire system, and then
Yeah.
that will tell me it. But you never know how far to go, right?
Mm.
Like if you come up with that cool moment for your mission, and it works for so many level like quality bars, because obviously different studios have different like ways of how they grade the progression of a mission, how it's coming
Mhm.
together before it gets to final, and if it's still hitting all of those at a certain point because they believe it's going to work based off past stuff that's in other areas of the game, no one does the full digging, and then
Yep.
you suddenly go, okay, do I just have to believe, or is there something else I could have done? You'll always second guess something like that. So yeah, like now I'm a little bit more rigorous about that kind of stuff. If I don't think it's possible in
Mm.
my mind, it's like now I need to find all the right people straight away. And I think the harder thing is when the expert in that field, and this is not a problem everywhere, isn't in your studio. So this is when you're working with
Yes.
multi studio like companies where they're in different countries as well. It's finding out who is the expert in this, and
Mm.
even worse, the person who built the system left the company.
Oh yeah.
Who's the person who now knows how it still works, right? And like those are like really weird edge cases I think you'll find in your career maybe, but it
Yeah.
can happen. And it's just like I think pushing a little bit more until you're satisfied with it, not necessarily taking, and this is, I would recommend this all the time, just heeding the word of someone a little bit more experienced, you saying it'll be fine. Like,
Yeah.
at least get them to prove it to you first.
Yeah, mate. No, it's a great point, and there's definitely more I think we could go into
Yeah,
with mistakes. But again, we
yeah.
want to share them with you because it's okay, as we said, to make mistakes. This is how
Mm-hmm.
you learn. This is how you get better. And any great designer has made plenty of mistakes. We talked about iterating is such a big part of our process, and it's part of your process is learning and growing. And I think we've not got long left, but we'll end this on a positive note, my friend. So let's kind of
Yeah.
go to the levels that we're the proudest that we've made, mate. So do you want to
Mm.
tell us a bit about them?
So I don't think I've actually been able to. I don't think I've been on any kind of content to speak about this one like
Mm,
since like Mafia came out. But like I was quite happy with how the Steamboat mission turned out, which is one
right.
of them I was largely responsible for in the remake. And it was just like how the idea came from the inception was playing the original game, which man, trying to play the original in like 2019, not the funnest experience. But you start to realize some of the stuff they have in the game, and it was never like prompted. You weren't prompted to see you could do this, but you could actually talk to some of the NPCs, which is something I
Mm,
didn't realize you could do back then. Obviously, they have like two VO lines, maybe if that. And like one of them is like, "Oh, did you like literally? Did you hear there's going to be fireworks?" And it was never actually happened in the original game because like the point of the mission is you go onto a steamboat and you're meant to like assassinate the counselor.
right.
And then I was just like, right, I'm going to build my mission around this. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you've worked on boat environments; they're not good for combat. They're awful.
Yeah.
So I also had that. Like Mafia is a shooty, like a very shoot heavy game,
Mm,
right? It has a lot of segments, and I was like, I can't really do a very tight corridor, good shooter experience here. But if we have this concept of building in the player's mind, there's going to be a fireworks show. So like, and all this idea really came from hearing that one line of view on the original. It was just this random thing I stumbled across when I was testing. And then it was just like, yeah, the entire combat sequence playing out in a firework display as you try to escape and like get off the ship. But there's like even learnings, and like you said about iteration on that. At one point, we were like, oh, but what if we let the player go anywhere they want down the ship? I was like, yeah, but that's not going to be a cool shootout, right? Because I'm now trying to guess where the player's going to go. And everyone would be on alert, and it was just turned into this little bit more short but choreographed experience, which we got to ramp up the tension, which like you've kind of talked about, like with pacing and stuff in the past, like through your podcast. And it's like, because the mission had been quite low up until that point, I was like, yeah, I can just kind of turn it up to 11 for here to kind of finish the mission. But that was my encounter with you trying to get metrics to work on a boat. Because especially a steamboat with like a paddle wheel and stuff, not super blocky. And stuff like that. So we would, like, the fireworks gave me a logical excuse as a designer to go to art. Like, bear with me a bit, but what if they started setting up a firework display on the roof? So there'd be crates around, there'd be things like that. What if it had a little observation desk? And it took some nuance and back and forth, but it worked overall, and at least it justified that kind of thing. But also, we still had the problem of we had to honor the original at the same time. But like, to me, it's like the original couldn't do this because of the tech. We can do particles, we can do fireworks shows and stuff like that because we came so along in the industry. And it was just kind of nice to be able to take something that wasn't there in the original and bring it like a new fresh coat of paint with like a new life and put a new event into it, which was quite fun.
Awesome, man. No, I'm glad it came out well for you. For myself, this is toughy. I got a couple, but I think I'll go with with my most recent release on Cyberpunk. It is and it does have a boat in it. I remember as well. But
boats are fun.
Yeah,
they're a pain in the ass to do certain things with, but they're fun environments. They're cool.
Yeah. So mine it's one of the side missions in Cyberpunk where you get to unlock Jonny's Porsche, and you go into a maelstrom, a certain type of enemies kind of home. They live in a container constructed environment, which is really fun for me to block out. The amount of routes available for the player as you have to go across through into actually the boat, and it's all leading up. You're thinking Adam smashes here again. We talk about the tension, the pacing, to find out he's not, but someone called Jeremiah is, reversing that. But then you get the payoff of that, of unlocking the Porsche at the end, is really nice. And it was at the time where, because obviously there's so many different play styles, it was finally the level when I kind of had figured out, right, how best to facilitate the choices. How do you lead them? How do you combine them as well? So the player's never on a kind of permanent path, shall we say. They can always adapt when they want, because you never know kind of the full play style the player will choose and what they'll upgrade in their abilities. So yeah, that one to me, mate, was a very nice one. As I said, it comes later in the game. The environment was really cool. Like I said, container-like buildings to then a boat itself, and unveiling the Porsche as well is fantastic. And after that, I think I definitely want to buy a Porsche. So I've got to save my pennies on that one, mate. Got to save it. But yeah,
you've already got the cap though, right? You've got the.
I got the caps. They know I'm loyal. They got me somehow, right? So that's it. All right, man. Well, we're going to wrap this one up. So we do hope that you've all enjoyed this. It's been an absolute blast from us. And if you want to get in contact, man, how did they get in contact with you, my friend?
So if you have any other questions or anything like that, you can reach out to me on Twitter at omni/92. I also do, outside of this, a podcast called the Level Design Podcast with a bunch of other people. And I've been on Max's podcast before, which I'm sure he's about to plug now anyway. But how about yourself, man?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter as well, which is just at MaxPairs, all one word. If you want to email any questions, just do so, leveldesignlobby@gmail.com. And if you want to hear more of my voice and see less of my face, you can do so by listening to my podcast, Level Design Lobby. You can find that all around YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, anywhere you listen, you can find it there. So yeah, Thank you.
It's just basically two podcasts collide. That's what's happening right
Exactly.
now.
Exactly. It's a war of podcasts, guys. You've seen a treaty right here. But yeah, we should to thank you all very much. So yeah, hope you enjoy it. Best of luck in your journeys and travels and in your careers, further from here. So take care, everyone. And yeah, we'll see you at some point.
All right. Bye.